Well, hello everyone. My name is Allison Niner. Welcome to Witching Hour. This festival is presented by the Englert Theater and Little Village Magazine. Witching Hour is a festival about exploring the unknown, discussing the creative process, and presenting new work. Before we begin, we would like to start by thanking our festival sponsors, our media sponsors, Gazette and Iowa Public Radio, grants from Think Iowa City, CVB, and ACT, Adamantine Spine Moving, Artifacts, Devotee, Feed Me Weird Things, Film Scene, Haba Salon, Iowa City Downtown District, Java House, Mark Signs Realtor, Martin Construction, Midwestix, Phoebe Martin Realtor, Reunion, Revival, Scope Productions, Underground Printing, University of Iowa Lecture Committee and University of Iowa Department of Communication Studies, Velvet Coat, Watt Technologies, and a special thanks to Iowa City Public Library for hosting us today. So, to introduce Shawn, he is the co-director of the Fed Up campaign and has spent nearly a decade working on economic justice issues internationally and domestically, including leading a groundbreaking campaign targeting the Federal Reserve. In addition to a workshop developing tangible ways to build locally rooted economic justice campaigns, Sebastian will give a talk on how the roots of inequality and racism are intertwined, how American capitalism couldn't exist without racism, and how racism continues to be used as a tool to further economic policies that drive inequality. And Shawn will also be hosting a workshop at Merge at 2 p.m. later this afternoon if you're interested in that. So without further ado, here's Shawn.
Thank you. All right. Can everyone hear me? Is this good? A little louder? Okay. So thank you, all of you, for coming in this, we're putting out new chairs. I just want to clarify that the title of this is How Capitalism is Designed to Kill You. I don't know if all of you are in the right spot. This is not How to Stop Capitalism from Killing You. This is not totally rad alternatives to dying under the boot heel of capitalism. This is How Capitalism is Designed to Kill You. So are we all in the right spot? Okay, good. So when I have to admit that I didn't come up with this title. I was talking to Andre, who's one of the organizers of the Witching Hour Festival. I was kind of talking about the different things I wanted to talk about, and I was had a really, really terrible, boring title. My title was Racial Capitalism and the Drivers of Inequality in the New Gilded Age, a qualitative and quantitative inquiry into the interrelationships between monetary policy, corporate concentration, and financialization, etc. American Dream or American Nightmare. So this is a better title. This is a much better title. I'm not sure if I can do justice to all of it. It's a really big topic. I was literally in my hotel room half an hour ago, frantically trying to figure out how to do this. So first, okay. Hello? Okay. Is this better? Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to cover. So first we're gonna do this, and then this, and then this, and then we'll get deeper into this. This, we've got to do this, of course, and then that. There's a little bit of, actually, so we can't do all of this, right? There's a lot to cover. We can't really cover everything. The way I think about it is there's this whole field, you could say the length of it is the history and the origins of capital. The width of it is, the theory and the underpinnings, and there's all this grass growing on it that is the data and our experiences, and it'd be great to be able to go for all of these acres and acres examining every blade of grass. But we only have an hour, now 55 minutes, so we're just gonna run through this field as fast as we can for 60 minutes and do what we can. We're not gonna cover everything, but it'll be whatever, a personal sort of, it'll be like this. So the reason that I think I'm talking about this is because I am the director of a campaign called Fed Up. It's a national campaign for a strong economy, and it is a national campaign of community-based organizations, mostly Black and Latinx community-based organizations, progressive labor unions, and economic think tanks, that are organized around the economy and specifically the Federal Reserve advocating for full employment policies. So why do we target the Federal Reserve? It's because the Federal Reserve is the primary, has been in the post-crisis period, the primary economic policymaker in the country. They're the ones who have the most power, have had the most power over whether or not we have a job and whether or not we get a raise. All right, it's the Federal Reserve, and most people don't know what they are, what they do, et cetera. I didn't know what it was or what it did before I got this job, and I got an assignment to figure it out. And now this is what I've been doing for the last 4 years. So why is the Federal Reserve, has the Federal Reserve been the most important economic policymaker? Let's go back 10 years ago, like 10 years ago this year. So it's 2018. Does anyone remember what happened in 2008? Yeah. I mean, I think most of us are still living with it. Like, quick recap, Wall Street committed a bunch of crimes and crashed the entire economy and put all of us unemployed. A lot of us were graduating into that environment with a ton of debt, and there weren't jobs out there for us, and we're still not recovered, right? So it was a really, really bad recession, and this presentation is going to be a lot of me yelling and gesticulating at graphs, so this is the first one. This dark blue line is the 2008 recession, right? You can see that it was deeper and longer than all the previous recessions for decades prior, right? It was really, really bad, and I don't need a graph to tell you that. Like, we know if we didn't experience it directly that we know people who were kicked out of their homes, who lost their jobs, who didn't know how to feed their families, and like most of us experienced that directly, right? And it was a huge, huge scale issue, right? There was $11.1 trillion in household wealth that was destroyed 10 years ago, right? Just gone because of the crimes of Wall Street. It was totally destroyed. Now, what should have happened with a hole this massive and this big is that we should have done what we did in the New Deal, right? The last time we had a catastrophic depression. We should have started a works progress administration. We should have been putting people to work, building infrastructure, creating arts programs, like paying people to put on plays, to make posters, to do art, to do all of those things so that we would get paychecks that we could use to pay for the things that we needed and jumpstart the economy, right? The problem was that Barack Obama was president and he was black, and so so Republicans didn't want to give him what he needed. They refused to pass the stimulus that was required. This is an $11.1 trillion hole. The stimulus that was passed was less than $1 trillion, right? It was $831 billion. It was a fraction of what we needed. So the recovery from the Depression should have been the job of our government. It should have been the job of Congress to give us what we needed to fill this hole, but they didn't do it, right? So since they didn't do it, to avoid catastrophe, the Federal Reserve stepped in, right? This shouldn't be their job, but this is what they did. They dropped interest rates down to 0 to pump money into the economy to try to get people working again. And I'd have a whole hour-long presentation about how this works. I'm just gonna skim over this right now. But basically, when interest rates drop, it encourages investment. It's easier for businesses to get loans, to hire people. Those people get jobs. They spend that money out in the world. That money creates more demand, which creates more demand for labor, which means more people get jobs, and they have more money to spend on things they need, and it's a virtuous cycle. So lower interest rates means more jobs. And higher interest rates means less jobs, right? So it means that's when you're putting the brakes down on the economy. And this is a really basic push and pull between workers and people who have money, right? How many of you have debt? I have debt. Everyone has debt, student loan debt, car debt, mortgages. Most of us have debt to survive. So when the interest rate goes down, we pay less on that debt. We have more money to buy on the things we need, which creates more demand. But of course, people with a lot of money don't want that because they earn less on that money, right? If you're a billionaire and you can make a ton of money by doing nothing if the interest rates are higher, you don't care. You want the interest rates to be higher and you want more people to be unemployed as a result. So there's a push and pull with this interest rate that is kind of like the balance of power between workers and the 1% that happens. And that's like, that is that balance of power that we as a campaign have really tried to push, right? So this was the height of the recession. 10% unemployment, 20% black unemployment, right? This is where we were. Congress didn't do anything, they did very little, and then the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates down to 0. And slowly and painfully and like not as good as it should have been, unemployment started to drop. But in 2014, people were saying that, okay, fine, we're done now, all right? Unemployment's at 6%, the recovery is over, this is as good as it gets. And by the way, when unemployment overall was at 6%, black unemployment was at 12%, which is even higher than the overall unemployment rate at the height of the recession. But the people at many people at the Federal Reserve who are appointed, largely appointed by banks, almost entirely white, and almost all from Wall Street, they said that's fine, that's how the economy should run. Like 12% black unemployment is totally normal, 6% unemployment is as good as anyone should expect. So that's where we started. We intervened right here. And it's really hard, right? The Federal Reserve is not a democratic institution. We cannot vote them out. We cannot, there are no mechanisms for the public to affect policy. So a lot of people thought like there's no way that we can affect any change here. Luckily, you know, like Janet Yellen, it was a very different type of Fed chair. She wasn't a banker, she wasn't from Wall Street, she's a labor economist. And she was the one who was pushing for lower interest rates and lower unemployment, but everyone else around her was pushing her to stop, to let unemployment be higher, right? Every bank, every corporation, right-wing economists, those were the only people engaged in monetary policy, and they were pushing her from that side. So even though she was someone who was on our side, we organized against her, right? We organized to her left to push her to push unemployment lower, right? That was a strategy to create political space so that when she was going into those meetings, she could say, there's a group of working people outside who are demanding and yelling at me to keep unemployment lower, and I need to respond to them. There are media articles, there are Wall Street Journal articles, there are New York Times articles that people are not happy, and that was necessary even in a situation where we had an ally. We needed to create pressure from the left to make that happen. And it is really hard and really complicated, right? Like we have to, like, you can't knock on doors and be like, do you have a moment to talk about the Federal Reserve, right? Like no one wants to talk to you about that. And so we do a lot of things like this. We go into different communities, we partner with community-based groups that do Fight for 15, to fight for fair scheduling, for paid sick days and other economic justice campaigns, on policing, on all of these issues, and say, you know, this is a crazy, complicated other issue, but it is where the power is, and if you care about your job, and if you care about your wages, let's go to where the power is and who's making those decisions. And we organize people in 12 different cities across the country to fight the Federal Reserve on this. And so this is where we started, and this is where a lot of people said unemployment should be, 6%, 12% black unemployment. Today, we created we were part of creating the political space for unprecedented job growth, right? Like today, unemployment is at 3.7%. It's the lowest rate it's ever been since 1969. 4 years ago when we started, no one thought it could get this low. Like there were people that were saying it should be at 6 and 7. The consensus was that 5.5% was the lowest it could go, and now we're at 3.7%. And I just want to put this in a little bit more context because yay, 6% versus 3.7%, it's like these numbers don't mean much and it's hard to conceive of. But when we started, 156 million people had jobs, and today 162 million people have jobs, right? So those are 6 million people, 6 million families that have jobs now that wouldn't have had jobs if the Fed did what it wanted to 4 years ago. 6 million people. So put that in context. take all of the people in Los Angeles, take all of the people in Chicago, add them together, and all of those people who didn't have jobs 4 years ago have jobs now. So it made a big difference, and I just want to say, like, just to put this in context, I talk a lot about the economy in general. Like, there are people who are saying, like, the economy is really great and super wonderful, like this guy, and he's taking a lot of the credit for it, but, like, let's put it in context, right? Like, this is where we were, right? This unemployment rate spiked up under George W. Bush. You know, like, the Federal Reserve intervened because Congress refused, and slowly over time, all of this happened, and you know, Trump got on the toboggan like right at the bottom here and is claiming credit for the best economy, you know, since 1969. So if anyone, you know, your uncles or whatever at Thanksgiving have something to say about this, I can send you this picture. Like, just like ask me. So yeah, this is where we are. Like, this is what the current Federal Reserve Chair says. The economy is too good to be true. Aren't you guys feeling that? It's amazing. There are no problems. Everyone has a job. Everyone's got what they need, right? Like, you feel that? No, right? But you should, right? Like, because if the economy is as good as it is, as good as it gets, Iowa is pretty much as good as it gets in the entire country. Iowa has the second lowest unemployment rate in the entire country, right? If this is as good as it gets, Iowa is really as good as it gets. Are you feeling that? Okay. So not just Iowa, but the lowest unemployment rate in the entire country is in Ames, Iowa. That's my hometown. Like, I grew up in Ames. Shout out to Ames. And Ames has the lowest unemployment rate in the entire country, 1.5%. Nowhere else in the country has it better than Ames, Iowa, People from Ames, raise your hands. All right, is it that good? Things are great there, right? This is what it's like in Ames and Iowa, like private pools, money raining down, right? So we know that it's not exactly like this, right? Like, and something is different, and it's about wages. So usually, like, there's this economic concept called supply and demand, and when unemployment goes up, there's a lot more people who need jobs, so wages go down. But when unemployment goes down, employers have to compete. Like, we want you to come work with us. There aren't that many people out there, so we'll give you higher wages. And then this is like that same shape of the graph that I was looking at before, and unemployment has gone down and down and down and down for the past 10 years, but our wages are completely flat. We're actually not earning anymore. We're working more, but we're not earning anymore. And this is the core part of that problem. This is one of my favorite graphs ever. I have it on multiple t-shirts. So this is a graph of productivity versus wages. Productivity means this is how much money you make for your boss, okay? You are making money for your boss every day you go to work. Now, in the 50s and through the 70s, you know, productivity went up, and then our wages went up. We made more money for our boss, and we made more money. Then, in the mid-late 70s, a lot of stuff happened, right? Multiple different things happened. Does anyone here remember the 70s? Anyone? A couple people here, right? So a couple things happened in the 70s. Number one, there was a oil crisis, and the Federal Reserve spiked up interest rates as high as they could go and deliberately caused a recession to spike up unemployment that undermined the power of unions. Reagan broke the airline unions, ushering in an era of systematic dismantling of union power. The farm crisis was spurred on by this like massive increase of interest rates. Does anyone remember the farm crisis? A bunch of people drove tractors down to DC. And the lasting impact of that is every year we make more and more and more and more money for our bosses, and we get paid the same. We don't get paid anything. We get paid the same as we did 30 years ago. So this is the core problem here, is we may be working, unemployment may be low, but we are not earning what we deserve. And I'm gonna keep coming back to this. So this is what our recovery actually looks like. Yeah, people are working, but 1 in 5 jobs are occupations where the median income is below the poverty line. Think about that. 1 in 5 jobs, 20% of those people working are working just to be below the poverty line. So we're talking about jobs in fast food and retail. Retail is the most common job in America. Walmart is the largest private employer in America. Has anyone here worked at Walmart? Oh, okay, well you guys are lucky, right? It's terrible, it's awful, right? And it's indicative of retail everywhere, right? You're not just making terrible money, you have no control over your schedule. You could be working 10 hours a week one week and 30 hours a week the next week, and your paycheck is not consistent. You don't know if you are gonna be able to pay your light bill or your car insurance because you don't know how many hours you're gonna get. And you can be punished if there's a hurricane and you don't show up to work. You get punished, you get fewer hours. You don't get an excuse for a hurricane. That is the working condition of the most common job in America, okay? The most common job in America has to deal with that, and by the way, that person is employed. If you work 10 hours a week at $7.25 an hour, you're part of that record low unemployment, okay? That is what we're talking about when people like Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve say that everything is amazing and unemployment is at record lows. This is what this recovery looks like. And remember that huge hole, right? That hole is nowhere near being filled. We are not, when our wages are flat, we cannot make up the ground that we lost, okay? All of us are poorer than we were 10 years ago, and we're not making any more money than we were 10 years ago. Black people had a historic amount of their wealth completely wiped out, and they have seen the fewest wage gains, right? But it also is true of white and Hispanic people also. We lost a lot of wealth and we're not earning anything to gain it back. So when people tell you that the economy is really, really great right now and we should be super grateful and be really happy about it, we're all worse off than we were 10 years ago. This is one really basic example. 40% of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency expense. Imagine that. Something happens to your car, right? Any kind of medical emergency. Life happens, $400 happens all the time. 40% of Americans can't deal with that. And this is the wonderful success story of Ames, Iowa, the lowest unemployment rate in the country. This is the poverty rate. This is the percentage of children who are on free and reduced lunch. During this time period, it has gone up, right? Unemployment is at record lows in Ames, Iowa, and more children than ever are on free and reduced lunch. That is what this booming, wonderful, low unemployment economy looks like. So this is the core of the problem. Why are our wages so low? If that is the problem, if we just aren't earning what we are deserving, and by the way, this trend did not start when the crash happened, right? This trend is decades long. This trend goes through Reagan and Bush and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and into Trump. This is not just Trump being evil, this is decades-long trend. What happened here? So we have to think about how our wages are set, right? A lot of economists try to say oh, wages are a function of productivity, and when productivity goes up, wages go up. Is that true? No, it's not true. I have a graph to show you that it's not true, right? It's not true at all. The wage that you get is the wage that is the lowest wage that your boss is willing to pay you, right? If your boss can pay you 25 cents less, he will. He has to, especially if it's a publicly traded company, right? Then it's your responsibility to your shareholders to drive wages as low as possible to get as much shareholder value. Your boss will pay you as little as possible, and that is how your wages are set. So this is you know, like, I love these cartoons from the 1910s because they speak to my heart. So this is the situation. Like, your wages are not set by like some magical number of productivity. Your wages are set by a negotiation between you as a worker and your boss as the person who is giving your wage, right? So it is a battle between your boss and workers, right? And like, this is what it was from the 1950s to the 1970s. 30% of the private sector was unionized. They were together, like working together in solidarity, collective bargaining to create this much strength for this fist to go up against this big gut, right? So you can imagine this battle happening for wages and why every time our productivity went up, we could punch this guy in the gut and he'd cough up a little bit more money, right? Like, that was the dynamic. And a lot changed, right? People died for that. That is right. People died for that. That is right. So I mentioned the 1970s as a big, enormous turning point. This is what happened in the 1970s. The red line is unionization rates. Look at how far that has fallen, right? Like, it is terrible. 30% private sector unionization, now it's 6% private sector unionization. That changes the entire labor market, right? So this is why we're in this unprecedented place. When 30% of the private sector is unionized and unemployment goes down to 3.7%, the UAW can say, we're going on strike unless you give us a raise, and good luck finding anyone else. Good luck finding a scab, because everyone else has a job. And if the UAW wins a raise, then all the other unions can win a raise. And if 30% of workers who are unionized get a raise, then every employer needs to compete for a worker who could get a union job. So that is why that graph, that productivity and wage gap, that wasn't union workers, that was all workers, right? Like, those wage gains go across to everyone. But when we don't have this collective power, then of course that's like a reason why we can't translate the tightness of the labor market, the demand for labor, into wages, because we don't have that collective power. It's almost completely eliminated because of a sustained and well-funded attack on unions that is decades long. So we went from this to this, right? That was our bargaining power, and this is our bargaining power. So imagine going up into that fight with just yourself. That's what we do every day, and it's no wonder that we're not earning what we deserve. So meanwhile, big businesses are getting bigger and bigger and taking more and more of the wealth and getting bigger and stronger and more powerful. This is something called corporate concentration. It's like more well known as monopoly and monopolization, and you've seen it everywhere, right? Like, remember when that guy got dragged off of the United flight? And it was just horrifying. It was awful. Like, he was like, I want to die. Remember, it was like really, really bad. And I remember people were like, I'm boycotting United. I was like, okay, like, then I guess you'll never just go to Texas or whatever. Like, there are 5 airline companies. You can't like, they dragged a person kicking and screaming off a plane, and I still have to fly United if it's the cheapest flight because there are no other options, right? Like, we know this in internet and telecom and Amazon and Google, right? Like, there are fewer and fewer companies that are more and more powerful, and it's not just in these high-profile sectors like tech, it is across all industry. All industry. So whatever sector you are in, you have fewer choices as a worker. You have fewer choices to say, you not only have less collective bargaining power, you have less bargaining power to say, you're not paying me enough, I'm leaving and I'm going to a competing company, because there are fewer competing companies to take your labor and give you what you deserve. And this is a map of corporate concentration and where it's very high. And if you notice, where it's kind of the worst is in Iowa in the Midwest. Like, this is where people have the fewest options. Do you guys feel that? Do you feel that, like, you could quit your job today and get a better job tomorrow because that's the way it should be with the lowest unemployment rate in the country? Do you feel that? It's hard to feel that when there actually just aren't many options. And it's specific to Iowa, too. This plays out everywhere nationally, but Iowa is an agricultural state, and agriculture is one of the most monopolized industries there is. And if all of the attendant industries are dependent on agriculture and it's monopolized, there are 2 seed companies that farmers can choose from, then we all have less choices. This article came out today, and everyone should read it. It's really good. So this is how big business is. Big business is huge. It is so much bigger. And when we go to the negotiating table for wages, we are this small, right? So of course we're not gaining what we deserve in wages, because this is the balance of power. And what that means is we get a smaller piece of the pie, right? So this is how much we got, like this is indexed to, in 1948, this is how much of a labor share we got, and we get less and less and less. Whenever, like whatever output there is, whatever the big pie of everything that goes out of America, the 1%, the owners, the bosses, they get more than ever, and we get less than ever. That's where we're at, because of that balance of power, because of this breakup right here. And you know, it feeds on itself, because for every dollar that our boss isn't giving to us that we deserve, they keep all of this, right? They keep all of this, they keep all of this, they keep more and more. We make more and more for them. We get the same amount and they get more and more and more. This area here is what they keep. So that makes them really, really powerful. And they take a lot from us, right? So 1979, I know like some people remember 1979. Was 1979 perfect? Was it great? Was it like, it seems, having not been there, it seems like a wonderful time. I think Richard Hell was talking about how awesome it was yesterday. But like, it was, I mean, it wasn't perfect, right? It's just that things have gotten so much worse since then. So this is a like hypothetical scenario of like, what if we rolled back inequality to the way it was in 1979? Well, if you're making $30,000 right now, you would be making $7,000 more. That's a tangible thing. Like, they took $7,000 away from you. What would you buy for $7,000? If you're making $30,000 right now, think about that. Would you be living in a better apartment? Would you have a better car? Would you get better insurance? They took that from you. All of those things they took from you. If you were making $50,000, you'd be getting $9,000 more. And you know, even crazier than this, because this is most of us, so we all get a little bit more. If we go back to 1979, the 1% has to give up a lot. They have to give up so much that this graph cannot even fit on this slide. It goes all the way off this slide. Do you have any idea how far off the slide this goes? It is bonkers. This is it. This is it. That was that graph, okay? This little piece up here was that graph, and this is how much they would have to give up, right? That is how much they have. And like all of this is the actual scale, right? Like that cartoon of the big fat corporation juggling the little worker, that was not to scale. I could not make that, like you would not even be able to see us as a speck if that was to scale, because this is a representation of how much power they have going into that negotiating space. And that negotiating space with a worker is not even where they're exerting the most power. You know where they're exerting the most power, right? They are funding campaigns to destroy worker power so they have more and more leverage going forward. They are dismantling environmental protections so that they can make more profits. They're dismantling unions. They're dismantling public education, public benefits, everything so that they can have more. So this is something like the scale, if you can imagine this scenario with this graph. Sorry, we'll do questions afterwards, but I'll just say, you know, I remembered at the beginning I was saying that this presentation is called How Capitalism is Designed to Kill You. and I'm like, haven't really said capitalism or talked about capitalism, and we're like halfway through this presentation. So this was a hard topic, and like I'm an organizer at heart, and I don't really think about things like capitalism that much in my daily life. Like what I see when I see this, I see organized money, and as an organizer, I feel and I know that the only thing that goes up against organized money is, does anyone know? Organized people, right. Organized people is the only thing that can go up against organized money. So I like really want to skip to the part where we do something about this and maybe like have a pretty light touch on how capitalism is designed to kill you, because it's kind of a downer. So here's a lesson in capitalism. You get what you pay for, and this was free. So like the core of this campaign, the title of this presentation, we're just gonna go through really quickly. Because honestly, like, I don't know. If you don't know how capitalism is designed to kill you, and if you don't like believe it, like we'll talk later. I can't like really get into it like super deep, but let's like just go through what we all know. You don't really need me to explain this. So here's like a basic definition of capitalism. It's a system where capital is controlled by a small share of private individuals, a system that uses markets to distribute human necessities, and a system where the motivation behind all economic activity is profit, right? So that's like a really basic definition. So what does that mean for us? So first, like this is a headline in Da Aficionado magazine. American capitalism was made possible through genocide, pillage, and slavery. Like we know this. We are on Native American land. Everything that was built in the beginning of this country was built by slaves, and there was an untold amount of death and destruction that even made capitalism possible in America. So that's like one way capitalism is designed to kill us. And we see that is not in the past, right? That interaction between labor and capital goes on every day, all the time, everywhere. The most dangerous job in America is agricultural worker, okay? The most dangerous job in America is agricultural worker. People are breathing in pesticides, they get cancer, they have lung disease, and they will not, and you know, that's the way capitalism works. If it will give you a profit, they will kill you, right? So this is a headline from the No-Doy Review of Books. If a job kills you but makes your job money, makes your boss money, they'll do it. And the only thing that's constraining them is the laws that they have to follow to like meet, to do that, right? So like, children would be in factories right now, right? Like they would be. Like there's a law against it, so they can't be. Like your boss, like $7.25 is the minimum wage. If your boss could pay you $6 an hour, he would. For those of you who earn tips, they pay a lot less, right? Like they will pay you as little as possible, and they know that they're not paying livable wages, right? They know that you can't afford health insurance for your kids or food or school supplies. It's not like they don't know that, right? That is just the way it is. They're willing to sacrifice your life for their profit. Sorry if this is really strident, but it's just, I don't know, the way it is. But yeah, so we see this every day, right? Like, again, I'm not gonna go through all the different ways. These are just like the highlights, the big ones. Like, we have a privatized healthcare system, a for-profit healthcare system. So the point is not to keep people healthy, the point is to make profits. Like, we all know this. If anyone has been in a hospital with a loved one, talking to an insurance company, begging and begging for one more day in the hospital, you know this. You know and are intimately acquainted with how capitalism doesn't care if you live or die. And then there's the big one, right? There's climate change. And I don't even want to get into this like too deep, because like we know this. Like, it is insane that there are a couple companies that are going to burn up the entire world. This report just came out a couple days ago. We have 12 years to limit climate change. This guy like stares straight into the sun and like doesn't care at all. Like there were a thing that happened a couple days ago. He repealed vehicle emission standards from the Obama era because they're not going to stop climate change, and like whatever, we're all going to die anyway. That was literally what was in the report. Like scientists say we have 7 years to stop climate change, and Obama's vehicle emissions aren't going to stop that, so let's just get rid of them. Let's just like burn the whole thing to the ground. That's like what this guy says. And right, and this is how much we can burn if we want to be under 2 degrees warming, this is how much we've already burnt, this is what they have access to now, and this is all they could have access to. Do you think capitalism is going to stop them from burning all of that and burning us all into, into nothing? That's not, like, something besides capitalism needs to stop that. So, and it's just 100 companies, right? Like, I know we all recycle and we all like try to do the right thing, but it's 100 companies that are causing 70% of climate change, and that again is capitalism. So that is where we are, and it's like very depressing, right? It's like very, very hard and very depressing. Like, this is why this is like the title of the presentation, but also like 5 minutes of the presentation. Like, I don't need to really beat this dead horse, because it's depressing, and like what I encounter a lot is like a lot of despair. And this is like, when I think of despair, I think of Morrissey. And this is what I feel like a lot of people feel. It's like, why should I waste time even thinking about or doing anything about this like completely hopeless situation, this completely terrible system? And to be frank, I hear this a lot from the people who have the least at stake. I hear this a lot from white people like Morrissey. I hear this a lot from, I hear this a lot from people who are like very, very smart and who like to talk about capitalism and Gramsci and Adorno and all those people, and like they have all the real solutions about like what we really need to do to actually solve these problems, and it usually involves them doing almost nothing and sacrificing literally nothing. So it's easy to despair, and it's easy to kind of feel like want to curl up into a ball, but we don't have to be like Morrissey. Does anyone want to be like Morrissey? No one wants to be like Morrissey, right? Like, we can stand up and we can do something. We can think about this and like think about like these are big problems, but we can think about them in a way that results in us doing something, anything, every day, okay? Like, these are big problems, but we can either do nothing or we can do something. So let's like err on the side of doing something. So when we talk about doing something, especially now in election season, a lot of times it gets boiled down to voting. Like, go vote. All of our problems will be solved when you vote, right? Like, we'll get rid of Donald Trump and everything will be wonderful. But we know that's like not entirely true, right? All of these problems that I've been describing predate Donald Trump, right? They're like big, deep problems that require big, deep, transformative solutions. So voting is not enough. Like, voting is the minimum. Like, you have to do that. You have to go out and vote and like do that. But you also need to do a lot more, right? So when we talk about what we can do, there's a lot of different things. You can think about, one way to think about this is like our relationship to the state. Like, voting is oftentimes the thing that it's like, this is the way you can make change. You vote and like hope for the best, and 4 years later you get to vote again, right? Like, that's usually the way this is presented to us. That's not the way it has to be. So one way is to like build things outside of the state, right? Like, you can think about worker cooperatives, land trusts, credit unions. Think of ways, this is something you can do every day, thinking about trying to make plans for building alternative systems outside of the state. Another thing is disrupting the state. If the state is, if the state is trying to speed climate change and install a sexual assaulter to the Supreme Court, like, maybe your only option is to like disrupt the state, to disrupt what's going on and to interrupt what the state is doing. And then another option is to work within the state, right? It's to try to change what the government is and what the government is doing. So these are all really good options, and like I've kind of like run through really fast and like talked really fast about a lot of super depressing stuff. So let's go through an exercise together and like reset, and I want you can like close your eyes if you want to. You can go along with this GIF of inhaling and exhaling. And let's imagine something, okay? Let's just like imagine, imagine with me now. So Imagine that you go to a high-quality public university, like University of Iowa, like where I went, University of Iowa, and you don't have any loans because college is free. You graduate, you have a degree, and you don't have any debt to worry about. You have all the options before you. And you are working, and you maybe start a family, and whenever you get sick, you get to get the care that you need. And even before you get sick, you can go to a doctor to make sure you don't get sick. And that's not just you, but that's your partner, that's your kids. Your kids also get to go. Your parents, you don't have to worry about them and their health. Your entire family has the health care that they need, and they have it for free, and you don't need to worry about the cost. Imagine all of that worry about your student loans gone. Imagine all of that worry about how you're going to pay for your kids and your parents' health care gone. Imagine that we have a new Green New Deal where you at any point can quit your job and get a job at a livable wage from the government to build the economy and the infrastructure that we need to fight climate change. Your boss is sexually harassing you, you can quit. Your boss isn't paying you enough, you can quit. And there's a job there waiting for you to actually build a better world. No student debt, no medical debt, and you actually have the option of a dignified job that does something positive. Okay. So that actually seems really utopian and really crazy and like maybe that'll happen in 100 years and whatever. All of those ideas are on the table right now. Like literally there are people who are running for president who have suggested every single one of those ideas. That world is possible. Okay, that world is possible, and not only is it possible, but all of you in this room have probably more power than anyone else in the country to make that world possible. Okay, so I'm gonna say that again. This world is possible because it's real. Like people have, you've seen the news articles. This Medicare for All has 60% approval across everyone, Democrat and Republican. People want it. Free public college has over 50% approval across everyone, right? A Green New Deal is incredibly popular and people want it. People want it, political candidates see that, and they've put it on the table. This world is possible and all of you have more power than anyone to make it possible. And I say that like, you know, with ambivalence, right? Because this here is LA County, this blue dot. And LA County has more people than this entire red section. That includes Iowa, okay? And there are 14 senators in this red section, and LA County has to share 2 senators with everyone else here, right? So this is one of the reasons that you all have a lot of power. And so sorry. So here's the thing though, like it's uncomfortable, right? Like I get it, it's like not totally fair that you all have this power. Like the other big thing that obviously I'm talking about is the Iowa caucuses, right? Like the Iowa caucuses determine what is politically possible in the national presidential elections, and Iowa gets to decide. One of the least populated, whitest states in America gets to decide what is politically possible going forward. That is a lot of power, and it's like uncomfortable to hold that power. But if you don't hold that power, if you don't take that power, like he will. And he has, and he's doing it, right? Like they are doing that. And how are they using that power? Like this is the power that is coming out of Iowa, right? This is Steve King, right? There is a Nazi in Congress, a Nazi that goes to Austria every quarter and meets with the far-right Nazi party to plan a global fascist movement. That Congress member is not from Mississippi. That Congress member is not from Alabama. That Congress member is from Iowa. That is how that disproportionate power is being used right now. This person, Chuck Grassley, has been in the Senate forever. And he stopped Merrick Garland from being on the Supreme Court, and he installed Brett Kavanaugh almost single-handedly, right? That is how Iowa's power is being used right now. So I know it is uncomfortable to say that you have this power, but other people are using that power right now. That could be your power, and instead it's these people's power. So this is what we're dealing with, right? Like, this guy. And like, when we get to the caucuses, a lot of people are already talking about, like, we just need to get rid of Donald Trump and then all of our problems will be over. And we just need to, like, everything, like, he's an evil person and I agree, but like, and then all of our problems will be over. But we, like, know that's not entirely true. Just getting rid of Trump isn't enough. I showed you so many graphs to show this, right? Like, just getting rid of Trump is not enough. Our problems are decades long, and they are deep, and they require transformative change. But like, Trump has created this incredible window, right? More people are politically engaged than ever. If I did this talk, probably in 2014, there would be like my parents and like a couple other people here, right? Like, Trump has created an unprecedented level of engagement, and we can use that window of engagement to actually get the transformative change that is on the table right now for the taking if we take the power that we can take. So here's what's gonna happen. Like, a bunch of politicians are gonna come to Iowa, right? You know this, right? Like, you know, like, they're already coming. They're already coming. It's like it's like 448 days away from the caucuses. I just learned that. It's 448 days away from the caucuses. They're already coming. And they are going to be trying to do two things to make their candidacy viable. They're gonna be trying to raise money, and they're gonna be trying to get votes, right? And like, sure, this stuff may be on the table now. People are talking about Medicare for all, and it's really popular. People are talking about free college for all. But they're also going to be trying to get money to make their candidacy viable. And if the big money is more organized than the big organizing, if organized money is bigger than organized people, this politician is going to have to make a calculation of, hey, I need this money, but this guy's like, yeah, this Medicare for all thing, I don't like it. I'm a health insurance company and I just like don't want it to happen. So I love you, I'll give you millions of dollars, but you gotta lose the Medicare for all thing. That'll happen if we don't organize, right? We know that'll happen. So this is what's at stake. We have 448 days to do it. And yeah, I just don't want this to happen, right? This is like, there's like headlines gonna be coming out of Iowa, and I don't want this to happen, right? We can do a lot better than this, right? Like, we can actually build the world that we want to build. Like, and you, again, you all have more power than anyone else to build it. So I'm getting to the last part of my, this was a different idea. I only have a couple minutes. I'll tell you about this later. But, so I wanna, yeah. So, so we're gonna end here, okay? So I want you to close your eyes again, or like stare into this GIF. Exhale, inhale. Imagine that world that was possible again. Imagine going to college for free, knowing that your kids could go to college for free, like the freedom that you'd feel to do what you want if you didn't have debt, if your health insurance didn't depend on having a job, that you know you could go anywhere in this country and still be insured. Imagine actually doing something about climate change, about having options when you work, about having a livable wage. Imagine being free of student debt, free of medical debt, taking care of your children, taking care of your parents, and having a good job. So that world is possible. You all can do it. I believe in you. You all can do it. Like, you can build this world. You have more power than anyone else in the country, and you have 448 days until the caucuses to make it happen. So thank you. That's the end. And I know that, like, so we're at time, and there's probably a lot of questions, and and discussion, and that's what the workshop at 2 o'clock is for. And I want to invite everyone to come. Like, it's pay what you will. You know, I just did a presentation on capitalism. I'm not going to ask you to, like, I'm not going to be a cop about it and see if you paid. But, like, everyone can come, like, pay what you want. It's going to be in the Merge building at 2 o'clock, and, like, let's keep talking about how to do it. So thank you.